Hey guys, tonight we're stepping aboard a Viking Longship, and trust me, the moment your foot touches that salt-soaked deck, you're going to regret every romantic notion you ever had about Norse seafaring. Picture this. It's 9th century Scandinavia. The sun barely crests the horizon, and you're standing on a narrow wooden vessel that's about to become your entire world for the next several weeks. The wind cuts through your wool cloak like it's made of tissue paper. Ocean spray stings your face, and the 40 unwashed warriors around you are eyeing the new recruit with a mixture of amusement and pity. You probably won't survive this, and by this, I mean just the first day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing the global Bedtime crew check in. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the harbor in what will one day be called Norway, watching as the crew makes final preparations. The longship before you is a masterpiece of Viking engineering. Shallow drafted, flexible, and designed to navigate both open ocean and shallow rivers. It's about 70 feet long and 15 feet wide, with a single mast rising from the center like a lonely pine tree. The hull is clinker-built, meaning overlapping planks of oak are fastened with iron rivets, giving the ship a distinctive rippled appearance. It's beautiful in a brutal, functional way. But here's what the history books don't emphasize. This technological marvel has absolutely no creature comforts whatsoever. The ship rocks gently against the dock, and you notice there's no cabin, no below-deck quarters, no galley. The entire vessel is essentially an open canoe with delusions of grandeur. Wooden chests line the center, doubling as both storage and rowing benches. Shields painted in bright reds, yellows, and blues hang along the rails, partly for protection, partly for intimidation, and partly because there's literally nowhere else to put them. The dragonhead prow curves upward menacingly, carved to frighten away sea monsters and coastal spirits. Modern joke. It also frightens away any hope of a pleasant voyage. You watch as crew members load supplies, barrels of fresh water, precious and never enough, sacks of dried fish that already smell like they've been dead for months, sealed clay pots of butter, which will serve as both food and waterproofing for the ship's wood. Someone's wrestling with a massive walrus hide tent that will provide the only shelter if you're lucky enough to make landfall each night. Spoiler alert, you won't always be that lucky. The Jarl, the expedition leader, is a grizzled man with a beard that's seen more battles than you've seen hot meals. He's barking orders in Old Norse, a language that sounds like someone's gargling gravel and threats simultaneously. You don't understand most of it, but the tone is universal. Move faster, work harder, stop looking so pathetic. He notices you staring and gestures impatiently. Time to board. You step onto the gangplank, which is really just a single wooden plank with no railings because Vikings apparently didn't believe in OSHA regulations. The ship dips under your weight, and you stumble slightly, catching yourself on the rail. Several crew members chuckle. Great start. You make your way to an empty chest bench near the middle of the ship, trying not to trip over coiled ropes, spare oars, and what appears to be someone's personal collection of weaponry just casually lying about. Here's a quirky historical tidbit that won't comfort you. Vikings often carved graffiti inside their ships. Archaeologists have found runic inscriptions in preserved vessels that basically say things like, "Thorstein carved this," or "Halfdan was here." Some scholars think these were protective charms. Others believe Vikings were just as prone to mindless vandalism as modern teenagers. Either way, you're now part of a tradition of people marking their territory on what might become their coffin. The crew is a diverse bunch, at least by medieval standards. Most are free men seeking wealth, adventure, or escape from debt. Some are younger sons with no inheritance prospects back home. A few are thralls, slaves, who've been promised freedom if they survive the journey and fight well in the raids ahead. Everyone has a job, and you're about to learn yours. The rowing master, a man with arms like tree trunks and a patience level approaching 0, shoves an oar into your hands. It's heavier than you expected, roughly 12 feet of solid pine with a wide blade at one end. You'll row when the wind fails, He grunts in accented but understandable language. You'll row when the wind blows wrong. You'll row when I say row. Understand? You nod, because what else are you going to do? Jump ship before you've even left the harbor? The reality of Viking longship travel is hitting you now. This isn't a cruise. This isn't even really a boat trip in the modern sense. This is a military expedition on a wooden platform that happens to float. Every person aboard has a purpose. Rowing, bailing water, navigating, cooking, keeping watch, fighting. There are no passengers. There are no tourists. If you're on this ship, you work or you go overboard, and not in the fun parasailing way. Around you, men are settling into their positions. Some are checking their oars, making sure the thole pins, the wooden pegs that hold the oars in place, are secure. Others are adjusting their sea chests, which contain literally everything they own. Spare clothes, maybe, personal weapons, trinkets, food rations, and possibly a few stolen treasures from previous raids. These chests are your seat, your storage unit, and if the ship sinks, your flotation device. Historians still argue whether Vikings actually used their sea chests as lifeboats, but given the zero other safety equipment available, it seems likely. The ship has no keel in the modern sense, just a long spine of timber running down the center. This makes the vessel incredibly flexible. You can actually see the hull twist slightly as the ship moves, which is both impressive engineering and absolutely terrifying when you first notice it. This flexibility is what allows longships to ride waves instead of fighting them, to bend without breaking in rough seas. It's also what makes the entire vessel creak and groan like a haunted house once you're underway. You glance toward the stern, where the steersman is checking the side-mounted rudder. Yes, side-mounted. Vikings hadn't figured out stern rudders yet, so the steering, or the steerboard, which is where we get the word starboard, is lashed to the right rear of the ship. It takes serious skill to control a vessel this size with what amounts to a really big paddle, and the steersman's position is one of respect. He's usually the most experienced sailor aboard, the one who's survived enough voyages to know when a wave is going to swamp you and when it's just posturing. The sail is still furled along the massive yard, the horizontal spar that will hold it. Viking sails were enormous, often made from wool woven into a thick, nearly waterproof fabric and dyed with stripes or geometric patterns. A single sail could require wool from over 200 sheep and hundreds of hours of weaving by Viking-age women. It's one of the most valuable items on the ship, and also one of the heaviest. When it's hoisted, it'll catch the wind and pull you forward at speeds up to 15 knots in good conditions. When it's not, you'll be rowing. Guess which situation is more common. Someone shouts, and the crew springs into coordinated action. Ropes are untied from the dock. The gangplank is pulled aboard. Men on shore give the hull a shove, and suddenly you're drifting away from solid ground. The harbor water is dark and cold, reflecting the gray morning sky. Other ships are preparing to launch as well. This is a small fleet, maybe 5 vessels in total, heading south for trading or raiding or both, depending on what opportunities present themselves. The rowing master bellows a command, and oars splash into the water around you. You fumble with yours, trying to match the rhythm. It's harder than it looks. The oar is heavy, the angle is awkward, and you're sitting on a curved surface that wasn't designed for comfort. Within minutes, your shoulders are burning. Within 10 minutes, you're wondering if you've made a terrible mistake. Within 15 minutes, you're certain of it. But there's no turning back now. The ship is cutting through the harbor, past fishing boats and smaller vessels. You pass a merchant ship, a proper cargo vessel with a deep hull and an actual covered area. You feel a pang of envy so sharp it's almost physical. That ship has shelter. That ship probably has better food. That ship isn't powered by the rapidly blistering hands of its passengers. The open ocean looms ahead, and the wind picks up. The sail will be raised soon, which should give your arms a break, but you've already learned an important lesson. Life on a Viking longship is about endurance, discomfort, and constant work. The adventure hasn't even really started, and you're already exhausted, spray-soaked, and surrounded by strangers who smell like they've never met soap. Someone passes around a skin of water. You take a sip, it's already starting to taste stale, and you've been aboard less than an hour. Another crew member offers you a chunk of hard bread. You accept it because you're not sure when the next meal is coming, and you bite into what tastes like wood pulp compressed into vaguely edible form. Welcome to Viking cuisine at sea. The ship clears the harbor mouth, and the swells increase. The deck starts to pitch and roll in a way the calm harbor waters didn't prepare you for. Your stomach does a little flip. Oh no, you can't be seasick already. You're a Viking now, or at least a Viking-adjacent temporary crew member. Vikings don't get seasick. Except they absolutely did, because they were human, and the human inner ear doesn't care how tough you think you are. You grip your oar tighter and try to focus on the rhythm. Pull. Lean back. Release. Lean forward. Repeat. Around you, men are singing a rowing song. Something rhythmic and probably obscene, though you can't make out all the words. The cadence helps, turns the brutal physical labor into something almost meditative. Almost. The coastline is receding now, becoming a dark line against the lighter sky. You're really doing this. You're really on a Viking longship, heading into open water with no GPS, no radio, no rescue services, and no idea if you'll see land again before nightfall. The reality is exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. And this is just the beginning. You haven't dealt with storms yet. Haven't tried to sleep on this thing. Haven't experienced the full aromatic bouquet of 40 men who won't bathe for weeks. Haven't faced the navigation uncertainty, the food monotony, the constant dampness, or the very real possibility of drowning in freezing water far from any shore. But for now, you row. The oar dips and pulls. The ship surges forward. The wind howls. The adventure continues. Your arms are on fire. Not metaphorically. They genuinely feel like someone's holding a torch to your muscles while simultaneously trying to pull your shoulders out of their sockets. You've been rowing for what feels like hours but is probably closer to 45 minutes. And every stroke is a fresh journey into pain you didn't know your body could produce. The rowing master paces along the center of the ship like a particularly aggressive metronome, shouting corrections and insults in roughly equal measure. Pull together, he roars. You row like a one-armed child. Rhythm. Find the rhythm or find the sea. It's unclear whether that last part is a threat to throw you overboard or just colorful imagery, and you're too exhausted to care. The thing about rowing a Viking longship is that it's nothing like the peaceful, meditative activity you might have imagined while watching a nature documentary about Scandinavian fjords. This is industrial-grade physical labor performed in the worst possible ergonomic conditions. You're sitting on a curved wooden chest with no back support, gripping an oar that weighs about as much as a small child, and trying to synchronize your movements with dozens of other people while the entire platform beneath you rocks and twists with every wave. The oar itself is a simple but brutal tool. The handle is rough with that's already raising blisters on your palms despite the fact that you've barely started this voyage. The shaft extends outward through a circular or port in the ship's side, just a hole in the hull with a wooden shutter that can be closed when you're not rowing or when waves are running high. There's no mechanical advantage here, no fancy gearing system. It's pure human muscle versus ocean resistance, and the ocean is winning. Here's something the Viking sagas don't mention. Rowing positions were assigned based on status and strength. The strongest rowers sat amidships where the hull is widest and the leverage is worst, meaning they had to pull harder to achieve the same result as those near the bow or stern. As the new guy, you've naturally been placed in one of these premium suffering positions. Lucky you. The rhythm is everything. When everyone pulls together, the ship glides forward smoothly, and the work is merely agonizing. When someone breaks rhythm, say, a certain newcomer who's never rowed anything larger than a rental boat at a lake, the oars clash, people curse, and the rowing master's face turns a shade of red that suggests he's contemplating murder. You try desperately to match the pace, watching the man in front of you, listening to the rowing chant, feeling for the collective motion. Vikings used rowing songs not just for entertainment but for coordination. The modern joke writes itself. The original workout playlist. The current chant is rhythmic and repetitive, something about Thor's hammer and a particularly unfortunate giant. And while you don't understand all the words, the beat is unmistakable. Pull on the strong syllables. Release on the weak. Your body starts to find the pattern even as your brain screams for mercy. Sweat is pouring down your back despite the cold wind, which creates its own special misery. You're simultaneously overheated from exertion and chilled by ocean spray and wind. It's like someone designed the least comfortable temperature experience possible and then made you perform hard labor in it. Your wool clothing, which seemed adequate at the dock, is now soaked through with a combination of sweat, sea spray, and probably some rain that started falling about 20 minutes ago without anyone bothering to mention it. The blisters on your hands are evolving. What started as tender spots have graduated to angry red welts, and you're pretty sure at least 2 have already popped. The Vikings around you seem completely unbothered by this. Their palms presumably calloused into leather from years of rowing, weapon work, and general medieval hand abuse. You, on the other hand, are discovering that modern life has left your hands embarrassingly soft and unprepared for authentic Viking activities. After what feels like an eternity, the rowing master finally calls for a pause. Oars up! The command ripples through the crew, and gratefully, so gratefully you could weep, you pull your oar inboard and rest it along the gunwale. Your arms are shaking. Your shoulders feel like they've been beaten with clubs. Your hands are raw and throbbing. And according to the position of the sun, you've been rowing for maybe 2 hours. Just 2 hours. The journey could last weeks. A quirky historical detail to distract you from your suffering. Viking ships often carried half-rowers, crew members who would spell the primary rowers during long journeys. However, on this particular expedition, the Jarl has packed the ship full of warriors and supplies, which means no luxury relief shifts for you. Everyone rows until the wind picks up or until someone collapses. Historians still argue whether this was standard practice or just the mark of a particularly ambitious or cheap expedition leader, but right now, academic debates feel very far away. The crew is using the break to drink water and adjust their positions. Some are wrapping cloth around their hands for protection, a trick you should have thought of about an hour ago. Others are stretching, working out the kinks in their backs and shoulders. One man is casually bailing water from the hull with a wooden scoop, because of course the ship leaks. Not dangerously, you're assured by his unconcerned expression, but enough that someone needs to bail regularly. Just another job on the endless list of tasks required to keep this wooden death trap moving. You try to stand, to stretch your legs, and immediately discover that your lower body has also been suffering. Sitting on a curved wooden chest with no back support for 2 hours has done interesting things to your spine and hips. Everything cracks and pops as you straighten up. You must look pathetic because one of the older warriors, a man with more scars than teeth, actually laughs and tosses you a piece of dried fish. "Eat," he says. "Build strength. We row again soon." The dried fish is about as appetizing as it sounds. It's hard, salty, and tastes like the ocean distilled into jerky form. But it's protein and your body needs fuel, so you gnaw at it while trying not to think about how long it's been since this fish was actually fresh. The Vikings have perfected the art of food preservation out of sheer necessity. You can't refrigerate things in the 9th century, so everything gets dried, salted, smoked, or fermented until it's basically indestructible. Flavor is optional. Survival is mandatory. Around you, men are talking and laughing, seemingly unbothered by the labor they've just performed and will soon resume. There's a camaraderie here, a shared understanding that this is just what you do on a sea voyage. You row. You rest briefly. You row again. You eat terrible food. You keep moving. Complaining won't change anything, so you might as well make jokes instead. The steersman is studying the sky and the sea with the intensity of a man whose decisions keep everyone alive. Navigation in the Viking Age is part skill, part experience, and part educated guessing. There's no magnetic compass yet. That won't reach Europe for several more centuries. Instead, Vikings rely on the sun's position, the stars at night, the color and temperature of the water, the behavior of birds, and possibly a mysterious tool called a sunstone that might have helped locate the sun on cloudy days through some property of crystal polarization. Modern scientists have tested this theory with calcite crystals and found it plausible, though we'll never know for certain if Vikings actually used them. What you do know is that the steersman seems confident, which is either reassuring or terrifying depending on whether his confidence is justified. He's keeping the ship on a southwesterly heading, following the coast at a distance. This is called coasting navigation, keeping land in sight when possible, using familiar landmarks, stopping each night at known harbors or beaches. It's safer than striking out across open ocean, but it's also slower and limits your raiding options to places with convenient coastal access. The wind is picking up, which brings both good news and bad news. Good news. The sail might finally be raised, giving your tortured arms a break from rowing. Bad news. Stronger wind also means bigger waves, more spray, and increased chances of everyone aboard getting thoroughly soaked. There's no winning scenario here, just varying degrees of discomfort. Prepare to raise sail, the Jarl bellows, and the crew springs into action with the coordination of people who've done this many times before. Several men move to the mast, untying the lines that hold the massive yard and sail in place. Others position themselves along the deck, ready to haul on ropes. The raising of a Viking sail is a major operation requiring most of the crew, and you're quickly assigned to a rope with several other men. When I say pull, you pull. Your rope partner instructs. Pull hard, pull together, or the yard swings wrong and kills someone. Clear, crystal clear. Nothing like the threat of accidental death by falling timber to focus your attention. The command comes and you pull. The rope is rough and thick, and it takes the combined effort of 6 men to raise the heavy yard and its attached sail. The massive rectangular sail unfolds as it rises, revealing stripes of natural wool and madder red dye. It's actually beautiful in a brutal, functional way, a work of art created purely for utility. The yard reaches the top of the mast and is secured with practiced efficiency. The sail catches the wind with an audible snap, and suddenly the entire character of the voyage changes. The ship surges forward, cutting through the waves with new purpose. The deck tilts slightly, and you grab for the nearest secure object to avoid sliding. The rowing master orders all oars inboard, and the crew complies with obvious relief. Under sail, the longship can reach speeds of 10 to 15 knots in good conditions, far faster than any amount of human rowing could achieve. But here's what nobody tells you about sailing. It's loud. The sail snaps and rustles constantly. The rigging creaks. The hull groans as the ship flexes over waves. Water hisses along the sides. The wind howls through the rigging and around the mast. It's a constant symphony of concerning noises, each one making you wonder if something's about to break or if this is just normal Viking ship ambience. You're finally able to rest your arms, but rest is relative. You're still cold, still wet, still sitting on a wooden chest in an open boat with no shelter. The wind is stronger now, and the spray comes more frequently. Your wool cloak is doing its best, but wool's famous water resistance has limits, and you're pretty sure you've exceeded them. The dampness is seeping through to your skin, and you know from unhappy experience that you won't be truly dry again until this voyage ends. One of the more experienced sailors sees your miserable expression and offers something between sympathy and mockery. First voyage. You nod. The rowing gets easier, he says. Your hands toughen up. Your back learns. But the cold and wet, those never get easier. You just get used to being uncomfortable. It's possibly the least reassuring reassurance you've ever received, but at least it's honest. The ship is making good time now, running before the wind along the coast. Rocky cliffs pass to your right, crowned with dark forests. Seabirds wheel and cry overhead. In different circumstances, this might be beautiful, even peaceful. In your current circumstances, cold, wet, exhausted, and with throbbing hands, it's more of a scenic backdrop to suffering. The rowing master has declared a longer rest period while the wind holds, which means people are breaking out personal food supplies and settling in for what passes as relaxation on a Viking longship. Someone produces a skin of ale, slightly sour but better than water that's been sitting in a barrel for days. It makes the rounds, and you take a grateful swig when it reaches you. The alcohol warms you from the inside, a brief respite from the pervasive chill. You flex your hands, examining the damage. The blisters are impressive. Red, raised, some broken and weeping. Tomorrow they'll hurt worse before they get better. If they get better. If infection doesn't set in from the combination of raw flesh and constant exposure to dirty seawater and unwashed rope. Viking medicine is mostly herbs, hope, and impressive pain tolerance, so you make a mental note to keep your hands as clean as possible, which is a hilarious goal in this environment. The afternoon wears on. The wind holds. The coast slides past. Your body slowly stops screaming and settles into a constant, manageable ache. This, you're learning, is the reality of Viking seafaring. Not glorious adventure, but sustained discomfort punctuated by moments of terror and brief intervals of almost acceptable conditions. The rowing has stopped for now, but you know it'll resume the moment the wind shifts or dies, and your arms are already dreading that inevitable moment. Your stomach growls with a ferocity that surprises you, considering the gnawing anxiety that's been your primary gut feeling for the past several hours. The sun is past its peak now, sliding toward the western horizon, and someone near the stern is unpacking what passes for the midday meal. You watch with a mixture of hope and dread as various unappetizing items emerge from sealed containers and leather bags. Welcome to Viking cuisine at sea, where the motto is technically edible and the presentation is here, don't starve. The ship's cook, though cook is generous for a man whose primary job is distributing pre-prepared food, moves along the deck with a wooden bucket and a ladle. He's doling out what looks like a thick, grayish porridge into wooden bowls that each crew member produces from their personal supplies. You fumble in your sea chest for your own bowl, a simple turned wood affair that's going to be your plate, cup, and probably hand-washing basin for the duration of this voyage. The porridge lands in your bowl with an ominous plop. It's made from barley or oats, hard to tell which under the layer of congealed fat floating on top, and has the consistency of paste used for hanging wallpaper. You stir it experimentally with your wooden spoon, and it resists the motion like it's already halfway to solid. Eat up, the man next to you advises through a mouthful. It's hot food. Won't get that every day. He's right, of course. This porridge was cooked before the ship left port, kept warmish in a sealed clay pot, and will be the last hot meal you see until you make landfall tonight. If you make landfall tonight. Vikings didn't cook aboard their longships except in the most desperate circumstances. Open flames and wooden boats filled with wool, rope, and tar-sealed planks don't mix well. So the seafaring diet consists of whatever can be prepared on shore and eaten cold, or whatever was preserved specifically to survive weeks without refrigeration. You taste the porridge. Functional, bland, greasy, and with a faintly rancid undertone that suggests the butter mixed in wasn't exactly fresh when it went into the pot. But it's calories, it's warmish, and your body needs fuel after hours of rowing. You eat mechanically, trying not to think too hard about the flavor or texture or the small dark bits that might be barley husks or might be something you'd rather not identify. Around you, crew members are supplementing their porridge with items from their personal stores. Dried fish makes another appearance. Apparently it's the staple of Viking sea travel, the thing you can always count on when everything else runs out. Someone's gnawing on a piece of hardtack so ancient and solid it could probably be used as a weapon. Another man is carefully rationing out what looks like dried meat, probably mutton or beef, salted and smoked until it's nearly fossilized. Here's a quirky historical detail that won't improve your appetite. Vikings often brought dried seabird eggs on long voyages. They'd raid nesting colonies before setting sail, hard-boil thousands of eggs, and pack them in barrels of salt. By the time you're eating them weeks later, they're rubbery, oversalted, and have a sulfurous smell that can clear a deck. Thankfully, no one's broken out the egg barrel yet, but you've been told it's aboard for emergencies. You're not sure what constitutes an emergency bad enough to resort to months-old seabird eggs, and you're not eager to find out. The dried fish in your hand, because someone's passed you another piece, apparently deciding you need more protein, is cod, the backbone of Viking seafaring nutrition. Cod can be dried in the cold Scandinavian air until it loses about 80% of its moisture, becoming hard as wood and light as a feather. In this state, it can last for years without spoiling. To eat it, you're supposed to beat it with a hammer to soften the fibers, then tear off pieces and chew them slowly, letting your saliva rehydrate the fish back into something approaching food. You don't have a hammer, so you just tear off a piece and start chewing, and chewing, and chewing some more. The cod has the texture of leather and tastes overwhelmingly of salt and fish oil. Your jaw is working overtime, and you're producing enough saliva to rehydrate a small desert, but slowly, very slowly, the fish softens and becomes something you can actually swallow. It's not good. It's barely acceptable. But it's food, and after the morning's exertion, your body is grateful for anything. Gets better when you're hungrier. observes the scarred warrior who gave you fish earlier. Month into a voyage, dried cod tastes like a feast. You're not sure if he's joking or if this is genuine Viking wisdom born from experience. And honestly, both options are depressing. The meal also includes small rations of butter, real butter, packed in sealed wooden containers and treated like the precious commodity it is. Butter serves multiple purposes on a Viking ship. You eat it for calories and fat. You use it to waterproof wood. You can even use it as a healing salve for wounds if you're desperate enough. The butter you're given is rancid. Of course, refrigeration won't be invented for centuries, but rancid butter is still butter, and in the Viking Age, you don't waste calories on squeamishness. Someone passes around a drinking horn filled with ale. It's sour and slightly murky, with floating particles you choose not to examine too closely, but it's liquid that isn't plain water, and that counts for something. Viking ale was weak by modern standards. They weren't trying to get drunk on voyages, just avoid the various waterborne illnesses that came from drinking untreated water. The alcohol content was enough to kill some bacteria while keeping everyone functional enough to row, fight, or not fall overboard. The modern joke practically writes itself. Vikings invented the original beer diet, where all your calories come from grain-based liquids and dried fish. And unlike modern diets, this one comes with the bonus of scurvy if you're at sea long enough without fresh vegetables. Actually, scurvy is a real concern, though it won't be formally understood until centuries later. Vikings on long voyages did suffer from vitamin C deficiency, which led to bleeding gums, loose teeth, weakness, and eventually death. They didn't know about vitamins, but they did know empirically that eating certain fresh foods prevented these symptoms. Wild onions, berries, and certain seaweeds were gathered whenever possible. Some Vikings even brought barrels of sauerkraut, fermented cabbage, which retained enough vitamin C to keep scurvy at bay. The fermenting process that Vikings loved wasn't just about preservation. It accidentally created health benefits they didn't fully understand but definitely exploited. Speaking of fermentation, someone's broken out what you're told is gamelost, old cheese. It's a semi-soft cheese that's been fermented with bacteria that give it a distinctly pungent aroma. Think of the strongest blue cheese you've ever encountered, then age it in a barrel on a ship for a week. The smell hits you before you even see it, a wave of sharp, almost ammonia-like funk that makes your eyes water. Several crew members accept pieces enthusiastically. You politely decline, and no one seems offended. More for them. The cheese situation reveals an interesting aspect of Viking food culture. They loved intense, fermented flavors that modern palates often find challenging. Fermented fish, fermented milk products, fermented vegetables. If it could be fermented, Vikings would try it. This wasn't just about preservation. There's evidence they genuinely enjoyed these strong flavors. Historians still argue whether this preference developed out of necessity and then became culturally embedded, or whether Vikings always had a taste for the funky and fermented. Your meal concludes with a piece of hard, dark bread. It's made from barley or rye, dense and chewy, with a sourdough tang that's actually not unpleasant. The bread is stale. It was baked days ago specifically so it would keep, but after the fish and porridge, it's almost refreshing. You gnaw at it slowly, working your tired jaw, washing down bites with sips of ale. The cook makes another round, this time with water rations. Each person gets a measured amount from the barrel, ladled into personal cups. The water tastes wooden and slightly stale, but it's wet and it's not seawater, which makes it precious. Water management is critical on a Viking ship. The barrels hold only so much, and while you can sometimes refill from streams when making landfall, you can never count on it. Rationing starts from day one. As you finish your meal, you notice some crew members are eating something else, something that wasn't distributed by the cook. One man is working his way through what looks like a whole dried bird, possibly a duck or small goose, preserved with salt and smoke. Another has produced a suspicious-looking sausage from his personal supplies. The wealthier or better-prepared Vikings have clearly brought supplementary rations, while you and the other less-equipped souls are making do with ship's provisions. Here's something the romantic Viking stories don't mention. Inequality existed even on longships. The Jarl and his favored warriors eat better. They have access to the good preserved meats, the less rancid butter, the bread that's slightly less stale. Social hierarchy doesn't disappear just because everyone's wet and miserable together. If anything, the hardship makes those small luxuries, a piece of decent cheese, a chunk of smoked pork, even more significant as markers of status. You're contemplating this cheery thought when someone passes around another leather bag. Inside are hazelnuts, actual, recognizable, almost normal food. You take a small handful gratefully. The nuts are from last autumn's harvest, stored carefully through the winter, and they're one of the few foods aboard that don't taste like salt, smoke, or decay. You crack them between your teeth. No nutcrackers on a Viking ship, obviously, and savor the mild, sweet flavor. It's the best thing you've eaten since boarding. The meal is winding down, and crew members are cleaning their bowls with seawater and scraps of cloth, then packing them away. Food hygiene in the Viking age is rudimentary at best. You rinse your bowl and spoon over the side of the ship, watching the fish bits and porridge remnants disappear into the dark water. Somewhere below, fish are probably enjoying the unexpected meal more than you enjoyed yours. Your stomach is full, which is good. Your stomach is also slightly uneasy, which is less good. The combination of rancid butter, dried fish, sour ale, and constant ship motion is creating interesting digestive sensations. You're not seasick, not yet, but you're definitely aware of your internal organs in a way you weren't this morning. Several other crew members look vaguely green, so at least you're not alone in your gastrointestinal adventures. The afternoon meal is over. Total duration, maybe 20 minutes of eating, followed by minimal cleanup. In those 20 minutes, you've consumed enough calories to keep rowing, enough salt to preserve a small army, and enough questionable proteins to make a modern food safety inspector weep. But you're fed, and that's what matters. The next meal won't come until evening, assuming you make landfall. If the wind stays favorable and you're forced to keep sailing through the night, dinner might be nothing more than dried fish and stale water consumed in darkness while trying not to fall off your sea chest. As if reading your thoughts about the wind, the breeze suddenly shifts. The sail begins to luff and flutter, losing its taut efficiency. The steersman curses and adjusts the rudder, trying to catch the new angle. The Jarl studies the sky with a practiced eye, then makes the call everyone's been dreading. Oars out. We row. Your arms, which had just started to forgive you for the morning's abuse, immediately file a formal complaint with your brain. But there's no appeals process in Viking seafaring. You retrieve your oar, position it through the oar port, and wait for the rowing master's command. At least you're rowing on a full stomach. That's something. Not much, but something. The rowing chant starts up again, and you pull. Your blistered hands scream. Your shoulders protest. Your back joins the rebellion. But the ship moves forward, cutting through the gray-green water, and you move with it. Stroke after stroke. Hour after hour. This is the reality of Viking travel. Brief periods of rest punctuated by extended periods of labor, all fueled by food that's barely tolerable and definitely not Instagrammable. And remember that dried fish? That leather-textured, oversalted, jaw-exhausting dried cod? You're going to be eating a lot more of it. Days of it. Possibly weeks of it, depending on how long this voyage lasts and how lucky you are with hunting and foraging during shore stops. Welcome to the Viking diet plan. All the salt you can't handle, none of the nutrients you need, and chewing mussels that could crack walnuts by the time you reach your destination. The sun is finally setting, painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple that would be breathtaking if you weren't so utterly exhausted. The Jarl has made the decision to make landfall for the night, a relief so profound you could weep. The steersman guides the ship toward a sheltered cove, and crew members are already preparing for the complex operation of beaching a 70-foot vessel without damaging it or drowning anyone in the process. As the longship's shallow draft allows it to glide into surprisingly shallow water, men jump overboard, yes, into the cold ocean, to guide the hull onto the beach. You're directed to join them, and before you can fully process the command, you're stepping over the side into water that's so cold it feels like liquid knives stabbing your legs. The shock steals your breath. The water comes up to your thighs, and your wool trousers immediately become sodden, heavy anchors trying to drag you down. Together, the crew hauls the ship further up the beach, past the high tide line. It takes all of you pulling in coordination, and your already exhausted muscles find new depths of fatigue to explore. Finally, the longship rests on the pebbled shore, tilted slightly to one side but secure. Men are already unloading the walrus hide tent, spare ropes for securing the ship, and supplies for the night. Here's where you learn the next brutal truth. There are no beds, no inn, no cozy Viking hotel waiting on the shore. What you get is the tent, if you're lucky enough to fit inside, or you sleep under the upturned ship, or you sleep in the open air wrapped in your cloak and whatever dry clothing you can scavenge from your sea chest. The tent goes up with practiced efficiency. It's a large A-frame structure that can shelter maybe 15 men if they pack in tight. The remaining 25 crew members will be sleeping under the overturned ship or out in the open. Social hierarchy determines who gets the tent. The Jarl, his closest warriors, the steersman, and the rowing master claim the premium sleeping accommodations. Everyone else draws lots or simply accepts their fate based on seniority and status. You are not important enough for the tent. Instead, you're directed to the space beneath the ship, which has been propped up on one side with oars to create a low, dark cave of sorts. The hull looms above you, smelling of tar and seawater, dripping occasionally from the seams. The ground is cold pebbles and sand, slightly damp from the waves. This is your bedroom for the night. Someone starts a fire on the beach. Finally, blessed warmth, and the cook sets about preparing an actual hot meal. A large iron cauldron appears from the ship stores, along with provisions for a stew. Water goes in first, from a nearby stream that someone scouted. Then dried fish, of course, some barley, wild onions that a foraging party has found growing nearby, and a chunk of the preserved butter for fat and flavor. It's not gourmet cuisine, but after a day of cold food and rowing, the promise of hot stew is enough to make your mouth water. While the stew cooks, you have the opportunity to assess your sleeping situation more carefully. The ground beneath the ship is uneven, rocky, and offers zero padding. Some crew members are gathering armfuls of seaweed and dried grass to create makeshift mattresses. You follow their example, collecting soggy vegetation and spreading it in a vaguely human-shaped area. It's lumpy, it smells like rotting marine life, and it's already soaking through, but it's fractionally better than sleeping directly on rocks. Your sea chest serves as your pillow, a hard, wooden pillow that's going to give you a neck ache, but again, fractionally better than nothing. You pull out your spare clothes to assess the damage. Everything is damp. Not soaking wet, but that pervasive dampness that comes from spending a day in an open boat being sprayed by ocean water. Your spare tunic feels clammy. Your extra socks are a lost cause. Even your dry cloak has absorbed enough moisture to feel heavy and cold. Here's a quirky historical fact that won't comfort you. Vikings often slept in their day clothes on voyages. The effort of undressing and redressing in cramped, dark, cold conditions wasn't worth it, and body heat was precious for drying damp wool. So you'll be sleeping in the same clothes you've been wearing all day, salt-stained, sweat-soaked, fish-scented clothes that are now also wet from your impromptu wade in the surf. Luxury. The stew is finally ready, and bowls are distributed. The hot liquid is glorious, warming you from the inside out. The stew itself is thin and bland by modern standards, mostly water and barley with occasional chunks of fish and onion. But it's hot, it's edible, and after the day you've had, it might as well be a 5-star meal. You cradle the wooden bowl in your blistered hands, letting the warmth seep into your damaged palms, and drink the broth in grateful gulps. Around the fire, the crew is relaxing for the first time all day. Men are talking, laughing, sharing stories from previous voyages. Someone produces a small carved flute and begins playing a simple, haunting melody. Another man is checking his weapons, running a whetstone along his axe blade with the meditative focus of ritual. The firelight flickers on weathered faces, and for a moment, just a moment, there's something almost pleasant about the scene. Then the wind picks up, and you remember that you're going to be sleeping outside, in damp clothes on rocky ground, with no shelter except an overturned boat hull. As darkness falls completely, the temperature drops noticeably. Your damp clothing, which was merely uncomfortable in daylight, becomes actively hostile to your comfort. The cold seeps through the wool, making your skin clammy and your muscles tense. Other crew members are wrapping themselves in their cloaks, pulling the fabric tight, trying to trap what little body heat they can generate. You attempt to arrange yourself for sleep under the hull. The seaweed mattress is already compressing into nothing, and you can feel every pebble beneath you. Your sea chest makes a terrible pillow, too high, too hard, too angular. Your cloak, which is your only blanket, is damp and provides minimal warmth. And you're wearing wet clothes, sleeping on wet ground, under a wet boat, listening to the sound of the ocean and the snores of 24 men who somehow seem comfortable in these conditions. Sleep, you're discovering, is going to be theoretical rather than actual. The man next to you, one of the veterans, has somehow achieved what looks like actual rest. He's curled on his side, cloak pulled over his head, breathing deeply and evenly. You try to emulate his position, but your body refuses to relax. Every rock digs into your hip or shoulder. Your neck aches from the wooden pillow. Your feet are cold because your socks are wet, and your boots are serving as a pillow extension because your sea chest alone wasn't uncomfortable enough. Around midnight, you're guessing based on the moon's position. Since obviously no one has a watch, you're still awake. Your muscles ache from rowing. Your hands throb with each heartbeat. Your back has discovered new and creative ways to hurt. And you're so cold that you've started shivering, which makes everything worse because now you're burning precious calories just trying to generate heat. A quirky and deeply unwelcome historical detail. Vikings occasionally dealt with nighttime cold by sleeping in groups, sharing body heat under communal cloaks. This was practical survival, not intimacy, but it required a level of comfort with your fellow crew members that you definitely haven't achieved yet. You're too proud and too new to ask for warmth sharing, so you suffer alone, shivering in your damp wool cocoon. Sometime in the small hours, you finally drift into something resembling sleep. It's not restful. It's more like a series of uncomfortable naps interrupted by shifting position to relieve one ache, which creates a new ache elsewhere. You dream fitfully of warm beds, dry clothes, and food that doesn't taste like salt and regret. Dawn comes far too early. The sky lightens from black to gray, and the camp begins to stir. Men emerge from the tent and from under the hull, stretching, groaning, assessing the damage from a night on cold ground. You sit up slowly, every muscle protesting. Your neck has a crick that suggests you'll be tilting your head at an odd angle all day. Your back feels like it's been beaten with sticks. Your hands hurt even worse than yesterday, the blisters now fully established and angry. Someone has already rekindled the fire and is preparing a breakfast of surprise, porridge, and dried fish. Your enthusiasm for this meal is minimal, but your stomach is empty, so you force yourself to eat. The porridge is cold this morning, having been prepared last night and left to congeal overnight. It has the consistency of paste and the flavor of sadness. The camp is breaking down with the same efficiency it went up. The tent is collapsed and packed. The fire is extinguished and scattered. The ship is being prepared for relaunching, which means everyone gets to wade into the cold ocean again. Your clothes, which never dried overnight, are about to get even wetter. The cycle of dampness continues. As you help push the longship back into the water, the cold surf soaking you to the waist once again, you realize something important. This is only day one. You've been on this voyage for barely 24 hours, and you're already exhausted, aching, blistered, and seriously questioning your life choices. The journey could last weeks. Weeks of rowing, weeks of dried fish, weeks of sleeping on rocks in damp clothes. And the sleeping situation doesn't get better. If anything, it gets worse. When the weather turns bad, you don't make landfall at all. You either anchor offshore and try to sleep sitting up on your sea chest while the ship rocks and rain pours down, or you keep sailing through the night with rotating watch shifts, which means interrupted sleep in even worse conditions than last night's rocky beach. Historians still argue whether Vikings genuinely enjoyed these voyages, or simply endured them as necessary ordeals for wealth, adventure, and status. From your current position, waist deep in freezing water, pushing a boat you're about to row for hours, having slept approximately 90 minutes on a bed of rocks, you're leaning heavily toward the endurance ordeal interpretation. The ship is afloat again. You climb aboard, your wet clothes now even heavier and colder than before. You take your position at your sea chest, retrieve your oar, and wait for the inevitable command. Your body is already dreading it. Your hands are screaming. Your back is filing formal complaints. But the rowing master is walking the deck, and you know what's coming. Oars out. We row. And so it begins again. Day 2. The nightmare continues. Except now you're doing it on almost no sleep, with worse blisters, in clothes that have achieved a state of dampness that seems scientifically impossible to exceed. At least tonight can't be worse than last night. Narrator voice. Tonight would, in fact, be worse. 3 days into the voyage, and you've discovered a smell you didn't know existed. The collective funk of 40 unwashed Viking warriors living in close quarters with no access to bathing facilities, proper latrines, or any concept of personal hygiene that would be recognizable to someone from the modern world. It's a smell that has layers, like some unholy aromatic onion of human misery. There's the base note of sweat, the middle notes of salt-crusted wool and fish oil, and the top notes of things we're not going to examine too closely, but which definitely involve bodily functions and maritime conditions. You've become part of this olfactory nightmare, of course. 3 days of rowing, sleeping in damp clothes, and eating fish has transformed you into exactly the sort of person you'd avoid on public transportation. Your hair is stiff with salt and grease. Your skin feels like it's coated in a film of ocean spray, sweat, and dirt that no amount of seawater rinsing can remove. Your clothes have achieved a state of grime that seems almost sentient. Here's something the Viking sagas definitely skip over. Personal hygiene on a longship ranges from minimal to non-existent. There's no bathing. No showers, obviously, those won't be invented for centuries. No proper washing facilities of any kind. What you get is occasional rinsing with seawater, which doesn't really clean you so much as make you salty and sticky, and the vague hope that you'll have access to fresh water when you make landfall. Some of the crew do make token efforts at cleanliness. You've seen men scrubbing their faces with seawater in the mornings, running wet hands through their beards, attempting to maintain some connection to civilization. A few have produced small combs from their personal possessions. Vikings were surprisingly vain about their hair and beards, and are working out tangles and salt deposits with varying degrees of success. But these are cosmetic gestures, surface-level attempts at grooming that do nothing to address the fundamental reality. Everyone aboard this ship is filthy, and everyone's getting filthier by the hour. The situation with your hands has evolved from painful to genuinely concerning. The blisters have mostly popped now, leaving raw patches that weep clear fluid and sting whenever you grip the oar, which is to say, they sting constantly during rowing shifts. You've tried wrapping them in cloth torn from your spare tunic, but the fabric gets soaked with seawater and sweat, creating a damp bandage that probably does more harm than good. Several other crew members have similar injuries, and the general attitude seems to be, row through it until calluses form or your hands fall off, whichever comes first. One veteran warrior with hands like leather has taken pity on you and offered advice. Piss on them. You blink, certain you've misheard over the wind and waves. Your hands, he clarifies. Piss on the wounds. Salt and piss together. Makes tough skin. This is apparently genuine Viking medical wisdom, passed down through generations of seafarers. The urea in urine has mild antibacterial properties, and combined with salt water, it supposedly helps wounds heal into thick calluses. Modern joke. Vikings invented urine therapy before it was cool, or ever cool, because it's not cool. It's deeply unpleasant. You haven't quite brought yourself to try this remedy yet, but you're keeping it in reserve for when desperation overcomes dignity. The hygiene situation extends beyond just not bathing. Your teeth feel fuzzy, coated with the residue of dried fish and stale bread. Vikings did clean their teeth. Archaeological evidence shows they used small sticks or bone fragments as toothpicks, and some even had small iron picks specifically for dental hygiene. But on a voyage, oral care falls by the wayside. You've seen a few crew members chewing on twigs, which apparently helps clean teeth and freshen breath, but the effect is minimal when your diet consists primarily of salt fish and your mouth is constantly dried out from ocean air. Your clothes present another hygiene challenge. The same wool tunic and trousers you've been wearing since departure have now marinated in a mixture of sweat, seawater, fish oil, porridge splatter, and various other substances. Wool is naturally somewhat odor-resistant and can wick moisture away from your body, which is why Vikings wore it exclusively, but these magical properties have limits. Your clothing has exceeded those limits. The fabric feels stiff and crusty in places, with salt crystals forming visible white patches where seawater has repeatedly soaked and dried. Changing clothes would seem like an obvious solution, except your spare clothing is in barely better condition, having been stored in a sea chest that's not exactly waterproof. Everything you own is damp or salt-stained or both. Some crew members have given up entirely and are just wearing the same increasingly disgusting outfit day after day, planning to wash everything properly when they reach their final destination. You're starting to understand this philosophy. Here's a quirky historical detail that demonstrates Vikings weren't complete barbarians. They did value cleanliness when circumstances allowed. Archaeological evidence from Viking Age sites shows bathhouses, grooming tools, and even tweezers for plucking unwanted hair. Saturday was designated as Bath Day in Scandinavian tradition. Lagerdagur literally means washing day in Old Norse. But at sea, trapped on a wooden platform with limited fresh water and no bathing facilities, even the cleanest Viking becomes a walking biohazard. The lice situation is developing nicely, by which I mean terribly. You felt the first itching 2 days ago and tried to convince yourself it was just dry skin or salt irritation. But this morning, you discovered an actual louse crawling through your hair. A fat, translucent little horror feasting on your scalp. You crushed it between your thumbnails with a satisfying pop and a completely unsatisfying realization that where there's one louse, there are dozens. Lice were so common in the Viking Age that they barely merited mention in historical sources. Everyone had them. Kings had them. Warriors had them. They were just part of life. Another small misery in a world full of miseries. On a longship, where 40 men sleep in close quarters, share blankets, and never wash their clothes or bodies, lice spread with enthusiastic efficiency. By the end of a long voyage, every single person aboard would be infested. The itching is maddening. You find yourself scratching constantly, your scalp, behind your ears, the back of your neck where lice apparently throw parties. Other crew members are scratching too, creating a symphony of fingernails on skin that would be comical if it weren't so pathetic. Someone mentions that the lice are worse in your beard if you have one, which is information you didn't need but now cannot stop thinking about. The smell, the lice, the unwashed bodies. These combine to create an atmosphere aboard the ship that's almost physically oppressive. Below deck on a modern ship would be bad enough, but remember, Viking longships don't have a below deck. You're all in the open air, which should help, except the open air on a Viking ship is trapped between high gunnels and limited by the press of bodies. The wind carries some of the stench away, but it can't keep up with the rate of new funk generation. Personal space has become a distant memory. During rowing, you're shoulder to shoulder with your bench neighbors, close enough to smell their breath, fish and sour ale. Notice the grease in their hair and observe the lice crawling through their beards. During rest periods, you're all packed together on and around the sea chests, trying not to jostle each other but inevitably making contact because there's simply not enough room for 40 men to spread out on a 70-foot boat. The worst time is sleeping, whether on shore or at sea. If you make landfall, you're crammed under the boat hull or packed into the tent with other men, sharing body heat and, unfortunately, body odors. If you're sleeping aboard, you're wedged onto your sea chest or curled in the bottom of the hull, with someone's feet near your head and someone else's elbow in your ribs, all of you exhaling the same stale air and fermenting in a collective stew of human essence. Historians still argue about how Vikings dealt with the psychological stress of these close-quarter conditions. Some suggest the strong communal bonds and warrior culture made it easier to endure. Others point to the violence that sometimes erupted on voyages as evidence that the stress was, in fact, barely manageable. From your current position, itching from lice, breathing through your mouth to minimize the smell, trying not to touch the man next to you who smells like he died 3 days ago. You're leaning toward the barely manageable interpretation. The bodily function situation deserves its own special mention in this hygiene horror show, but we'll save that delight for the next section. For now, just know that when nature calls on a Viking longship, the facilities would make a gas station bathroom look like a luxury spa. Your fingernails are black with grime, a combination of tar from the ship, dirt from shore stops, and various unidentifiable substances. You tried to clean them with your knife, but it's a losing battle. The grime is embedded. Your hands look like you've been working in a coal mine, and no amount of seawater scrubbing makes any difference. Several crew members have the same issue, sporting medieval dirt undernails that would horrify any modern manicurist. The salt is everywhere, crusted on everything. It's in your hair, making it stand up in stiff spikes. It's in your eyebrows, forming tiny crystals that catch the light. It's in your beard stubble, creating a texture like sandpaper. It's in the folds of your clothes, chafing your skin raw wherever fabric rubs against flesh. You taste salt constantly, in your mouth, on your lips, even in your nose. You've become a salt-crusted human pretzel, preserved for posterity. One small mercy. Vikings used a mixture of fat and ash to make a primitive soap, and some crew members have small quantities stashed in their sea chests. You've seen them using it to wash hands and faces during shore stops when fresh water is available. The soap is harsh and alkaline, made from animal fat and wood ash, and it leaves your skin feeling stripped and dry, but it does actually remove grime. Unfortunately, soap is a precious commodity not to be wasted on a common crew member mid-voyage, so you've been managing with just seawater and wishful thinking. The overall effect of all this accumulated grime and smell is that the ship has developed its own ecosystem. Seabirds follow the vessel, attracted by food scraps and the general aura of decay. Small fish cluster near the hull, feeding on whatever gets thrown overboard. And the crew itself has become a mobile colony of unwashed humanity, each man contributing to the collective funk, each day adding new layers to the archaeological site that is your clothing. By week 2, assuming you last that long, you'll stop noticing the smell as much. Olfactory fatigue will set in, your nose essentially giving up on trying to process the overwhelming input. This is both a blessing and a curse. Blessing because the constant assault on your nostrils becomes background noise. Curse because you've now fully joined the ranks of the stinking, unable to even detect your own contribution to the problem. But that's future misery. Present misery is quite enough to handle. You're itching from lice, your hands are raw and probably infected, your clothes are disgusting, your hair is a salt-crusted mess, and you smell like a fish market had relations with a gym locker room and the resulting offspring died in a pile of wet wool. And you can't do anything about any of it. There's no shower, no laundry, no escape, just days more of this, accumulating grime and parasites, becoming progressively more disgusting until you finally reach a destination where fresh water and bathing facilities exist. The Vikings who do this regularly, who make these voyages year after year, must develop either an immunity to discomfort or a profound philosophical acceptance of filth. You're developing neither, just a growing appreciation for indoor plumbing, washing machines, and soap that doesn't require rendering animal fat. Welcome to Viking hygiene, where the motto is, at least you're alive, and the standard is, technically still human-shaped. The moment you've been dreading has arrived. Nature is calling, and on a Viking longship, answering that call involves logistics that would make a military operation look simple. You've been putting this off for as long as physically possible, clenching muscles you didn't know you had. But biology is not negotiable. You need to use the bathroom, and the bathroom situation aboard this vessel is about to become your new least favorite thing about Viking seafaring. There is no bathroom. Let's start with that fundamental horror. No toilet, no latrine, no designated facility of any kind. What you get is called the heads, the very front of the ship, the bow area where the dragon head carving looks out over the waves. It's called the heads because it's at the head of the ship, and also because it's where you're about to risk your head falling off from sheer terror. You make your way forward, trying to look casual, though everyone knows exactly what you're doing because everyone has to do this same humiliating dance multiple times per day. The bow narrows to a point, and there's a small platform that extends slightly beyond the main deck. This is your toilet, a wooden plank over open ocean, no walls, no privacy, no safety rails worth mentioning. The procedure, as explained by a helpful crew member who's enjoying your discomfort far too much, is straightforward in theory and horrifying in practice. You straddle the rail, lower yourself until you're basically hanging your backside over the freezing North Atlantic, hold onto a rope for dear life, and hope the ship doesn't hit a wave while you're in this supremely vulnerable position. Modern joke practically writes itself. Vikings invented the first high-stakes bathroom experience, where the penalty for poor timing isn't embarrassment. It's falling into the ocean and drowning while your pants are down. You position yourself carefully, gripping the rope so tightly your already damaged hands scream in protest. The wind is whipping around you because of course it is. The ship is rocking because it never stops. And you're acutely aware that you're suspended over dark, cold water that would kill you in minutes if you fell in. The psychological pressure to perform quickly while not losing your balance is intense. Then there's the practical problem of clothing. Viking trousers aren't exactly designed for easy access. You're wearing wool pants that tie at the waist, possibly with a belt over that, and removing these obstacles while balanced precariously on a narrow plank in a moving ship requires acrobatic skills you don't possess. You manage an awkward partial lowering of garments while trying not to think about what happens if you lose your grip. The actual act is as undignified as you imagined. The cold wind hitting extremely personal areas. The constant fear of falling. The knowledge that roughly 39 other men can see you right now, though most are polite enough to pretend they're not looking. The seabirds circling overhead like nature's most judgmental audience. And the ocean spray occasionally reaching up to surprise you in ways that nature documentaries never prepare you for. Here's a quirky historical detail that won't make you feel better. Vikings apparently had a sense of humor about this situation. Archaeological evidence suggests they told jokes and stories about people falling from the heads during storms or being washed away by waves mid-business. These stories were probably meant to be cautionary, but the Viking sense of humor being what it was, they were also probably considered hilarious at mead halls. You finish as quickly as possible and haul yourself back to relative safety, reassembling your clothing with shaking hands. Your legs are trembling from the awkward position, your hands hurt from gripping the rope, and your dignity has taken damage it may never recover from. And you'll have to do this again, multiple times per day, for the entire voyage. The head situation gets worse in bad weather. When the seas are rough and waves are washing over the bow, using the bathroom becomes genuinely life-threatening. Some crew members simply refuse to risk it and instead use buckets that are later emptied overboard, though finding privacy for this option on an open ship is its own challenge. Others wait until landfall, which can mean holding it for 12 or more hours while rowing and being jostled by waves. Neither option is appealing. For solid waste, the head's arrangement is at least straightforward. Everything drops directly into the ocean, carried away by currents and consumed by fish that you try very hard not to think about when eating the next day's catch. For liquid waste, things are simultaneously simpler and more complicated. During the day, men simply stand at the rail and urinate directly into the sea. No ceremony, no privacy, just a long line of Vikings casually relieving themselves over the side like it's the most natural thing in the world. At night or during storms, the bucket system comes into play. Wooden buckets are distributed and later emptied over the side, though the process of finding a bucket, using it in the dark while the ship pitches, and then emptying it without spilling on yourself or others requires skill that comes only with practice. You don't have the skill yet, and your first nighttime attempt results in splashing your own foot and nearly dropping the bucket, much to the amusement of nearby crew members. The smell situation, already bad, is compounded by the bathroom arrangements. Despite the ocean carrying most waste away, the head's area maintains a persistent funk. Splashing from waves brings the scent back aboard. Imperfect aim by tired or drunk crew members leaves residue. The wooden planks themselves absorb odors over months of use. The result is that the bow of the ship smells exactly like you'd expect a medieval toilet to smell, but with the added bonus of fish and seawater notes. Toilet paper doesn't exist yet. That won't be invented for centuries. What you get instead is the rag on a stick method, where a communal sponge or cloth is tied to a rod, soaked in seawater, used and then rinsed in the ocean. This is shared among the crew, because apparently personal hygiene items aren't a concept yet. The modern germaphobe in you is screaming, but the medieval you accepts this as normal because everyone else seems unfazed. Some crew members skip the communal rag entirely and just use seawater and their hands, rinsing in the ocean afterward. This seems marginally more sanitary than sharing a cloth with 40 other men, but also means that hands you're sharing food with have been. Well, you try not to think about it. Remember that urine therapy advice for your blistered hands? Suddenly seems less shocking when you consider what else those hands have been doing. Historians still argue about exactly how Vikings handled shipboard sanitation, since the sagas aren't exactly detailed on bathroom logistics. Archaeological evidence from preserved ships shows where patterns in the bow areas consistent with the heads theory, and medieval sources from other maritime cultures describe similar arrangements. But the exact details of Viking bathroom etiquette remain somewhat mysterious, lost to time and possibly deliberately left unrecorded because even medieval chroniclers had their limits. The psychological aspect of this bathroom situation can't be overstated. Every basic biological function becomes a calculated risk. You have to time your trips to the heads when the seas are calmest. You need to watch for waves. You must maintain balance while in the most unbalanced position possible. And you're doing all this while exhausted from rowing, possibly underfed, definitely dehydrated, and wearing clothing that's difficult to manage even in ideal conditions. Seasickness makes everything worse. If you're feeling nauseous, and plenty of crew members are, despite being experienced sailors, the last thing you want is to hang over the open ocean while the ship bucks and rolls. But biology doesn't care about your comfort. Vomiting over the side is at least straightforward. You lean over the rail and let it fly, hoping the wind doesn't blow it back in your face or onto your fellow crew members. This happens frequently enough that people have learned to check wind direction before assuming position. The combination of poor diet, limited fresh water, and stress means that digestive issues are common. Constipation from dried food, or the opposite problem from bad water or spoiled provisions, can make the bathroom situation even more urgent and uncomfortable. There's no Pepto-Bismol, no modern medicine at all. What you get is herbal remedies if someone thought to bring them, or more likely just suffering through until your system adjusts. Women had it worse, though there are few women on raids and trade voyages. The rare female crew member would have the same terrible facilities as the men, with the added complications of menstruation, which in the Viking Age was managed with wool cloth that was washed and reused. The logistics of dealing with this on a ship with no privacy, limited washing water, and communal living quarters would have been nightmarish. During shore stops, the bathroom situation improves marginally. At least you can walk into the woods or behind rocks for privacy. But even this comes with challenges. Unfamiliar territory might harbor dangers, you can't wander far from the group, and you're still dealing with the same lack of toilet paper and cleaning facilities. Plus, after days at sea, your legs are unsteady on land, creating a whole new balance challenge. One veteran sailor shares what might be wisdom or might be hazing. The trick is not drinking much water. Less in, less out, fewer trips to the heads. This is terrible advice that will lead to dehydration, but you can see the logic that must have driven generations of seafarers to deliberately reduce their fluid intake just to avoid the bathroom ordeal. Of course, reducing water consumption in a salt air environment while performing hard physical labor is a recipe for serious health problems, but immediate comfort sometimes wins over long-term planning. The nighttime bathroom situation deserves special mention for sheer misery. In darkness, with the ship moving unpredictably, finding your way to the bow without tripping over sleeping crew members, ropes, or equipment is challenging enough. Actually using the heads in pitch blackness, when you can't see the waves coming or judge your balance visually, requires either desperation or insanity. Most crew members opt for buckets at night, accepting the dignity loss in exchange for not falling into the dark ocean. Lightning jokes about the situation abound among the crew, because if you can't laugh about hanging your vulnerable parts over freezing ocean water while clinging to a rope for dear life, you'll go mad. Someone makes a crack about fishing with unusual bait. Another suggests that the dragon head on the bow is making the same expression everyone does while using the heads. The humor is crude and obvious, but it serves its purpose, making the unbearable slightly more bearable through shared misery and acknowledgement of absurdity. You complete your third trip to the heads of the day and make a private vow to eat and drink as little as possible, even though you know this is unhealthy and ultimately futile. Biology will have its way regardless of your preferences, but the hope of fewer bathroom trips is compelling enough to override rational thinking. As you settle back onto your sea chest, trying to ignore the pitying or amused glances from crew members who remember their own first voyages, you realize this is just another layer of Viking seafaring misery. The rowing destroyed your hands and back. The sleeping arrangements prevented rest. The food assaulted your digestive system. The hygiene situation gave you lice and made you smell like a corpse. And now the bathroom facilities are threatening your life and dignity several times per day. Welcome to nature's call on a longship, where every trip might be your last, and privacy is a luxury left on shore with civilization. The sky has turned the color of old bruises, purple, gray, and an ominous greenish tint that makes the veteran sailors exchange worried glances. You've been at sea for nearly a week now, and until this moment, the weather has been relatively cooperative. Unpleasant, yes. Cold and wet, absolutely. But survivable. What's brewing on the horizon is something entirely different, and even the most experienced crew members are moving with urgent purpose, securing loose items and checking the rigging with grim expressions. The steersman is watching the approaching storm with the intensity of a man reading his own death warrant. The waves are building, rolling swells that make the ship pitch and yaw in ways you haven't experienced before. The wind is shifting direction erratically, and the sail is being lowered and furled with frantic efficiency. In a storm, the massive sail becomes a liability. Too much wind can snap the mast or capsize the entire vessel. Better to ride it out under bare poles, using oars for minimal steering control. Secure everything! The Jarl roars over the rising wind. Lash down the chests. Check the cargo. Anyone who loses something overboard answers to me. The crew scrambles to comply, tying ropes around sea chests, ensuring weapons are stowed, making certain nothing can slide across the deck or go flying into the ocean when the real weather hits. You're trying to help, but mostly you're trying not to vomit. Your stomach is doing acrobatics that would impress a circus performer. The motion of the ship has changed from the gentle rocking you'd almost gotten used to a violent, irregular heaving that seems designed specifically to upset human equilibrium. Seasickness, which you've mostly avoided until now, is arriving with a vengeance. Here's something the romantic Viking tales skip over. Seasickness was absolutely a factor in Norse seafaring. Even experienced sailors got sick in rough weather. The sagas occasionally mention warriors made unsteady by storms, which is a polite way of saying they were leaning over the rail painting the ocean with their breakfast. You're about to join this proud tradition. The first wave hits with shocking violence. Water crashes over the bow, a wall of green-gray ocean that sweeps across the deck and soaks everyone in the forward third of the ship. The water is so cold it steals your breath, and the force nearly knocks you off your sea chest. You grab for the nearest secure object, a rope tied to the mast, and hold on with your abused, blistered hands screaming in protest. The ship tilts at an angle that seems physically impossible. You're looking down at the ocean on the port side, which is now far too close, while the starboard rail rises high into the air. For a moment that stretches into eternity, you're certain the vessel is going to capsize, flipping completely and dumping everyone into the freezing North Atlantic. Then, with a groan of stress that sounds like a living thing in pain, the longship rights itself, shedding water through the oar ports and over the rails. Bail! Bail! Someone is shouting, and you realize that impressive amount of water came aboard and stayed aboard. Several men are already working with wooden scoops and buckets, desperately throwing water back into the ocean before the ship accumulates too much weight. You grab a bucket and join them, scooping and throwing, racing against the next wave that's already building on the horizon. The modern joke would be that Viking ships had the original bilge pump system, pure human panic and wooden buckets. Except there's nothing funny about it right now. If the bailing can't keep pace with the incoming water, the ship will sit lower in the waves, take on more water, sink lower still, and eventually just surrender to the ocean in a death spiral of flooding and drowning. Your stomach finally gives up the fight. You drop the bucket and lurch to the rail, leaning over just in time to lose what little food you'd managed to eat this morning. The porridge and dried fish make a reappearance, and you heave until there's nothing left, then heave some more because your body hasn't gotten the memo that the stomach is empty. The irony of leaning over the rail exactly like using the heads isn't lost on you, even through the misery. You're not alone. Several other crew members are in similar states, gripping the rail and contributing their meals to the ocean. Even some of the veterans look green around the edges, though they're managing to keep working through their nausea. The rowing master is somehow still bellowing orders while looking distinctly unwell, which you have to respect even as you wish he would be quiet because the noise is making everything worse. Another wave crashes over the bow. More water floods the deck. The bailing brigade redoubles their efforts, but it's like trying to empty a bathtub with a teaspoon while someone keeps adding water with a bucket. The ship is riding lower, and you can feel the difference in how it handles the swells. More sluggish, less responsive, more at the mercy of the waves than dancing with them. The rain starts. Not a gentle drizzle, but a torrential downpour that arrives all at once, as if someone in the sky overturned a cosmic bucket. The rain is cold and hard, pelting your face, running down inside your already soaked clothing, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. The world narrows to just the deck beneath your feet, the rail you're gripping, and the general impression of chaos and water everywhere. Lightning splits the sky, a jagged white-purple tear in the dark clouds, followed almost immediately by thunder so loud you feel it in your chest. Vikings navigating by sun and stars suddenly have neither, just darkness, rain, and the occasional terrifying illumination from lightning that reveals waves towering higher than the mast. A quirky and deeply unwelcome historical detail. Vikings had no life preservers, no flotation devices beyond their sea chests if they could grab one, and no real rescue options if someone went overboard. In a storm, if you fall in, you're gone. The ship can't turn around in these conditions. No one can see well enough to spot a person in the water. The cold will kill you in minutes anyway. So the only strategy is, don't fall in. The steersman is fighting the side rudder with both hands, trying to keep the ship angled properly to the waves. Take them head on and you might break apart from the force. Take them broadside and you'll capsize. He's looking for the sweet spot, an angle that lets the flexible hull ride up and over without being overwhelmed, and he's doing it by feel and experience in conditions where any mistake means everyone dies. Hours pass, or maybe minutes. Time loses meaning when you're alternating between bailing, vomiting, and holding on for dear life. The storm doesn't build to a crescendo and then fade. It just maintains a constant level of terrifying intensity. Wave after wave crashes aboard. The bailing never stops. The rain never stops. The ship keeps groaning and flexing and somehow staying afloat despite physics suggesting it shouldn't. Your hands are beyond pain now. They've entered some transcendent state where the blisters and raw flesh have merged with rope burns from desperate gripping, saltwater exposure, and pure exhaustion into a unified field of suffering. Every time you grab a rope or the rail or a bailing bucket, it's agony. Every time you let go, you risk being thrown across the deck by the next wave. There's no good option, just choosing between immediate pain and potential death. One of the younger crew members is crying, trying to hide it, but tears are mixing with rain and seawater on his face. No one mocks him. Everyone understands. This is legitimately terrifying. The ship is a tiny wooden fragment being thrown around by forces that could crush it like an eggshell. The Norse gods might protect seafarers, or they might not. Viking theology wasn't big on guarantees, more on honoring the gods and hoping for the best while preparing for the worst. Historians still argue about how many Viking ships were lost to storms. The sagas record some famous wrecks, but probably missed countless others where everyone died and no one survived to tell the tale. Archaeological underwater surveys keep finding wrecks from this period. Longships that went down and stayed down, taking their crews with them. You're very aware right now that you could be joining those statistics, becoming an archaeological footnote for future scholars to puzzle over. The Jarl is moving through the ship, checking on crew members, offering encouragement, ensuring everyone is still functional. When he reaches you, he has to shout to be heard over the wind and rain. First storm, you nod, not trusting your voice. You survive this, you can survive anything. The gods test us. Prove you're worthy. He claps you on the shoulder with bruising force and moves on. You're not sure if you feel encouraged or just more aware of how terrible this is. Night falls, which makes everything exponentially worse. Now you're experiencing all the same terror, but in complete darkness except for the occasional lightning flash. The waves you can't see are somehow more frightening than the ones you could watch approaching. The sounds are amplified. The creaking of the hull, the roar of wind and water, the shouts of crew members, all creating a cacophony of doom. Someone starts singing a Norse prayer or maybe just a rowing chant adapted for this situation. Other voices join in, creating a defiant chorus against the storm. The singing serves multiple purposes. It keeps morale up, helps coordinate the bailing efforts, and gives everyone something to focus on besides the very real possibility of dying in the next few minutes. The words are lost to you in the wind, but the rhythm and intent are clear. We're still alive, still fighting, still here. The storm peaks sometime around midnight. At least you think it's midnight based on nothing but a feeling, since you obviously can't see stars or sun. The waves reach truly mountainous heights, and the ship is climbing them like a wooden roller coaster designed by a sadist. Up, up, tilting at impossible angles, then cresting and plunging down the other side so fast your stomach stays at the top while your body descends. One massive wave breaks directly over the ship, burying everything in white water. For a moment that lasts forever, you're underwater, holding your breath, still gripping the rope but completely submerged. The ship is buried, and you have time to think, this is it. This is how it ends. Then the longship breaks free, surfacing like a breaching whale, shedding tons of water, and somehow, impossibly, still intact. The bailing reaches a fevered pitch. The ship is dangerously low, water sloshing across the deck with every movement. Everyone who can stand is bailing, throwing water overboard with desperate efficiency. Your arms are burning, your back is screaming, but you don't stop because stopping means sinking. Gradually, imperceptibly at first, the storm begins to ease. The waves are still huge but no longer mountainous. The rain is still falling but no longer trying to drown you vertically. The wind is still howling but no longer threatening to tear the mast from its step. The ship rides a little higher as the bailing finally gets ahead of the incoming water. Dawn breaks on a gray, exhausted world. The storm hasn't stopped, but it's diminished to merely terrible instead of apocalyptic. Crew members slump where they stand, too exhausted to celebrate survival. You're soaked to the bone, chilled to your core, every muscle quivering with fatigue, and you've never been so grateful to see a miserable gray morning. The Jarl does a head count. Everyone's accounted for, bruised, battered, exhausted, but alive. It's a minor miracle. Ships have been lost in lighter storms than what you just survived. The fact that this particular longship and crew made it through is part skill, part good ship construction, and part sheer luck. You collapse onto your sea chest and immediately realize everything you own is soaked. Your spare clothes, your food supplies, everything. The chest isn't waterproof. Nothing is waterproof after a storm like that. You'll be dealing with the consequences of this soaking for days. Moldy food, clothes that won't dry, personal items ruined. But you're alive, which makes those concerns seem manageable. Welcome to storm survival on a Viking longship. Where the Dramamine doesn't exist, the life vests are imaginary, and your survival depends on a wooden boat flexing just enough to not break while 40 terrified men bail for their lives. The sun is barely visible through a thin layer of clouds, but it's there, and the steersman is studying it with the intensity of a scholar deciphering ancient runes. This is navigation, Viking style, part science, part art, part guesswork, and part prayer to whichever god might be listening. You've been at sea for over a week now, and you're beginning to realize that nobody aboard this ship is entirely certain where you are or where you're going. This is both normal and absolutely terrifying. The steersman, a grizzled man named Bjorn who has more voyages under his belt than you have years on Earth, is using a combination of techniques that would make a modern GPS engineer weep. He's watching the sun's arc across the sky, noting its position relative to the ship. He's observing the color of the water, which apparently tells him about depth and currents if you know what to look for. He's studying the behavior of seabirds, because certain species only venture so far from land. He's even tasting the water occasionally, checking for the freshness that indicates proximity to river mouths. "We're here," Bjorn announces, pointing to a spot on an imaginary map that exists only in his head. Probably, that last word does not inspire confidence. Here's the thing about Viking navigation. There were no charts in the way we think of them. No detailed maps with longitude and latitude. No compasses pointing reliably north. Magnetic compasses won't reach Europe for several more centuries. What the Vikings had was accumulated knowledge passed down through generations, mental maps built from repeated voyages, and a lot of educated guessing based on environmental clues. The sun is the primary navigation tool when it's visible. Vikings knew that at certain latitudes, the sun reaches specific heights at noon, and by measuring this angle, using nothing more sophisticated than their hands held at arm's length, they could estimate how far north or south they'd traveled. East and west positioning was much harder, relying more on dead reckoning. Estimating your speed and direction, accounting for currents and wind, and hoping your calculations weren't too far off. But right now, after yesterday's storm, even Bjorn admits the reckoning is compromised. Storm pushed us, he says with a shrug that's meant to be casual but comes across as concerning. Could be 20 miles off course. Could be 50. Won't know until we spot land. The mysterious sunstone makes an appearance. Bjorn pulls from his pouch a chunk of what looks like clear crystal, probably Iceland spar, a form of calcite. He holds it up to the clouded sky and rotates it slowly, squinting through it at different angles. The crystal apparently has properties that can reveal the sun's position even through cloud cover by showing polarization patterns in the sky. Modern scientists have tested this and found it plausibly works, though exactly how Vikings discovered and used this technique remains debated. Historians still argue whether sunstones were genuinely used for navigation or if the few references in the sagas are metaphorical or mistranslated. But watching Bjorn work with his crystal, making small adjustments to the course based on whatever he's seeing through it, you're inclined to believe the technique is real, even if the science behind it was understood purely through trial and error. That direction, Bjorn finally declares, pointing toward what you have to trust is west-southwest, though for all you know it could be east-northeast. The Jarl nods acceptance, and the course is maintained. This is Viking navigation. Informed guessing with consequences, where being wrong means missing your destination entirely, running out of supplies in the middle of the ocean, or crashing into unexpected coastline in the dark. The problem of longitude, figuring out how far east or west you've traveled, is particularly vexing. Vikings could sail along a latitude fairly accurately by keeping the sun at a consistent noon height, a technique called latitude sailing. If you wanted to reach a known destination at a known latitude, you'd sail north or south until you hit that latitude, then turn and sail east or west until you found land. Simple in theory, tedious and uncertain in practice. But what if you're trying to find a specific harbor, not just somewhere in England? Then you're relying on landmarks, memorized coastal features, and the hope that you approach land during daylight so you can actually see what you're looking for. Approaching a rocky coast at night in fog is a death sentence, which is why Viking voyages typically involved lots of cautious coasting. Staying close to shore, putting in at night, avoiding the open ocean when possible. Except when it's not possible, like right now. You're out of sight of land, have been for 2 days, and won't see it again until Bjorn's calculations prove accurate or inaccurate. The waiting is psychologically exhausting. Every minute spent staring at empty horizon is a minute wondering if you're sailing toward your destination or away from it, toward safety or toward the edge of the world that some still believe exists despite increasing evidence otherwise. One of the crew members is studying birds, specifically the type and behavior of seabirds following the ship. Gulls, he notes. Still seeing gulls. Can't be more than a day from land, maybe less. Different bird species venture different distances from shore, and experienced sailors use this as a rough gauge of proximity to coastline. No birds at all means you're truly in the middle of nowhere. Certain petrels and albatrosses mean you're in very deep water. Common gulls mean land is relatively close, though close in ocean terms can still mean dozens of miles. The water color is another clue. Deep ocean is dark blue or even purple in certain lights. Shallower coastal waters trend toward green or brown, especially near river mouths where sediment clouds the sea. Bjorn is constantly checking the water, looking for that telltale color change that indicates the continental shelf and approaching land. So far, it's still deep water blue, which means more waiting, more uncertainty, more hoping the course is true. A quirky and somewhat reassuring historical detail. Vikings sometimes brought ravens on long voyages. They'd release the birds periodically, and if the raven flew in a specific direction and didn't return, it meant land was that way. If it circled and came back to the ship, it meant open ocean in all directions. This technique supposedly helped Floki Vilgerarsson discover Iceland, earning him the nickname Raven Floki. Your voyage hasn't bothered with ravens. Either the Jarl didn't think of it, or the destination is familiar enough not to need avian assistance. But you wish you had some now. A bird's-eye view of where land might be would be incredibly valuable right about now. The sun moves across the sky, and Bjorn makes occasional minute adjustments to the course. The steersman's job is exhausting in ways that aren't immediately obvious. He's standing for hours, gripping the heavy side rudder, feeling through the wood how the ship responds to waves and wind, making constant tiny corrections to keep the vessel on course. His arms must be screaming, but he shows no sign of fatigue, just absolute concentration on the task of keeping everyone alive and pointed in roughly the right direction. Navigation also involves understanding currents, which are invisible but powerful. The North Atlantic has major current systems that can push a ship miles off course if not accounted for. Vikings learned through experience where these currents ran, how strong they were in different seasons, and how to compensate. But after a storm that scrambled your position and possibly pushed you into unfamiliar waters, even the best current knowledge becomes uncertain. The crew is getting anxious. Over a week at sea, supplies dwindling, no land in sight, and only Bjorn's confidence, which may or may not be justified, that you're heading the right direction. Conversations are quieter, more tense. Men are checking their weapons more frequently, a nervous habit that reveals underlying stress. The Jarl projects calm authority, but you can see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes scan the horizon constantly, looking for the land that should be appearing soon but isn't. You're rowing again, of course you are, because the wind has died to almost nothing and the ship needs to make progress. Your hands have developed calluses over the blisters, creating thick, rough patches that hurt less than before but still hurt. The rowing rhythm is meditative now, almost automatic, your body having learned the motion through repetition and suffering. Pull, lean, release, reach. Pull, lean, release, reach. The monotony is broken only by the uncertainty of whether this effort is propelling you towards salvation or deeper into empty ocean. Land! The shout from the bow cuts through the rowing chant like a knife. Everyone's head snaps up. The rowing falters and stops as crew members crane to see. There, on the horizon, is that a dark line? Or just clouds? Or wishful thinking? Bjorn is staring intently, shading his eyes. Could be, he says cautiously. Could be land. Could be fog bank. The difference matters enormously. Land means success, supplies, rest. Fog means more sailing through uncertainty, possibly into unseen rocks or hostile coast. The rowing resumes with renewed energy, everyone pulling harder, eager to close the distance to whatever that smudge on the horizon might be. Minutes pass like hours. Gradually, the smudge resolves into something more definite. A low, dark line that stays consistent instead of shifting like clouds or fog. It's land. Actual, genuine, blessed land. The relief aboard the ship is palpable. Men are grinning, slapping each other's backs, offering prayers of thanks to Thor, Odin, or whichever deity they favor. Bjorn's navigation proved accurate, or at least accurate enough. You found land, even if it might not be exactly the land you were aiming for. As the ship draws closer, details emerge. Rocky coastline, dark forests climbing hills, a river mouth with what might be a settlement. Bjorn is studying the landmarks carefully, cross-referencing with his mental map. This is it, he finally announces with satisfaction. Or close enough. We'll coast until I'm certain. The next hours are spent carefully navigating the coastline, Bjorn comparing what he sees to what he remembers from previous voyages. A distinctive cliff formation, an oddly shaped island, a waterfall visible from the sea. These are the landmarks that make up Viking navigation, memorable natural features that serve as signposts for those who know what to look for. There, Bjorn points to a protected harbor. That's our landfall. The Jarl agrees, and the ship turns toward shore. The anxiety of open ocean navigation dissolves into the relief of having arrived. More or less on target, more or less on schedule, through a combination of skill, experience, and luck that you're only now beginning to appreciate. As the longship enters the harbor, you realize you've just experienced Viking navigation in all its uncertainty and ultimate success. No electronics, no precision instruments, no weather satellites or radio beacons. Just sun, stars, watercolor, bird behavior, and optical crystal, generations of accumulated knowledge, and navigators like Bjorn who carry entire oceans in their heads and somehow bring ships home, or at least to land, more often than not. Welcome to finding your way across the North Atlantic, where GPS stands for guess, pray, and sun watching, and the navigation system is one experienced Viking's brain versus the infinite ocean. The beach rushes up to meet the ship's bow with a grinding crunch of wood on pebbles, and you've made it. 2 weeks at sea. 2 weeks that felt like 2 years, and you've actually reached your destination. The coast of what will someday be called England stretches before you, green and misty and utterly foreign. Crew members are leaping over the side, some kissing the ground in genuine relief, others immediately organizing to secure the ship and scout the surrounding area. You stumble onto the beach on legs that have forgotten how to walk on stationary ground, and the earth seems to sway beneath your feet in phantom waves. But here's the uncomfortable truth that's dawning on you as you watch the crew transform from exhausted sailors into alert warriors. The voyage was just the beginning. This isn't a pleasure cruise that's now concluded with everyone heading to comfortable hotels. This is a raiding expedition, and the real violence, the part the sagas actually focus on, is about to begin. The Jarl is already organizing teams. Scouts fan out to assess the area, locate settlements, and watch for any organized resistance. Warriors check their weapons with practiced efficiency. Axes, swords, spears, shields that have been stashed carefully during the voyage are now being distributed and inspected. The ship that served as your transportation is being converted into a temporary fortress, pulled high onto the beach and surrounded by the beginnings of defensive earthworks. You're handed a spear and a small wooden shield. The implication is clear: you're now a warrior, whether you feel like one or not. The rowing was brutal, yes, but at least it was just hard work. What's coming next involves actual combat, actual danger from human opponents rather than just weather and waves. The survival skills you've developed over the past 2 weeks, enduring discomfort, working through pain, functioning on minimal sleep and terrible food, were apparently just preparation for this. The scouts return with information. There's a monastery about 3 miles inland, poorly defended, wealthy with donations from the faithful. There's also a village nearby, likely to be abandoned once word of Viking ship spreads, but possibly containing supplies, livestock, and valuables. The Jarl makes his decision quickly. The monastery is the primary target, the village secondary if time and circumstances allow. Here's where the reality of Viking raiding becomes unavoidable. This isn't going to be glorious battle against worthy opponents. This is going to be attacking people who can't meaningfully fight back. Monks with no combat training. Villagers whose idea of defense is hiding in the woods. The Vikings aren't seeking honorable combat. They're seeking wealth, supplies, and the reputation that comes from successful raids. The moral implications of this would trouble you more if you weren't so utterly exhausted and focused on just surviving the next few hours. The march inland is surreal after 2 weeks aboard ship. Your legs are unsteady on solid ground, your sense of balance confused by the lack of motion. The earth feels too stable, too still, and you catch yourself compensating for waves that aren't there. Other crew members are experiencing the same phenomenon. Sea legs in reverse, where you're adapted to the ship and now maladjusted to land. The countryside is beautiful in a way that ocean never was. Green fields, flowering hedgerows, birds singing in trees that don't rock with waves. It's peaceful, pastoral, completely unaware that violence is approaching. You feel a twinge of something, guilt, regret, but it's buried under exhaustion and the survival instinct that's kept you going this long. The monastery appears ahead, a cluster of wooden and stone buildings surrounded by a low wall that's more symbolic than defensive. Bells are ringing, not in alarm yet, but calling monks to prayer. The timing is almost poetic in its irony. They're gathering to worship while raiders gather to strike. The Jarl's orders are clear. Secure the valuables, minimize unnecessary killing, get out fast before organized resistance arrives. Vikings aren't mindless berserkers. They're professionals who understand that successful raiding means taking what you want and leaving before the local lord musters troops. The monastery's treasury is located quickly. Monks aren't subtle about where they keep their wealth, and chests of silver coins, gold religious artifacts, and valuable illuminated manuscripts are hauled out and distributed for carrying. You end up carrying a heavy silver chalice and a bag of coins, feeling like a particularly well-armed thief. Around you, other Vikings are loading up with communion plates, jeweled reliquaries, candlesticks, anything valuable and portable. The monks watch in horror as their sacred objects are treated as common loot. But there's nothing they can do except survive and rebuild after the raiders leave. A quirky historical detail that provides no comfort. Vikings actually had complex rules about raiding behavior. Killing unnecessarily was discouraged because it brought unwanted attention and revenge attacks. Gratuitous destruction was wasteful. You might want to raid this place again in a few years, after all. The goal was efficient theft, not massacre. This doesn't make the experience any less terrifying for the monks, but it does mean most will survive to tell traumatic stories about the Northmen. The village is next, though by the time you arrive, it's been mostly abandoned. Word spread fast. It always does, and the villagers have fled into the surrounding forests, taking their most precious possessions with them. What remains are livestock, stored grain, tools, and the valuables too heavy or cumbersome to carry into hiding. The Vikings help themselves efficiently, setting fire to a few buildings more as warning than destruction, gathering food supplies that will be welcome after weeks of dried fish. You're loading sacks of grain onto a requisitioned cart, performing manual labor that feels almost normal after the rowing, when you hear shouting. Local resistance has finally materialized. A group of armed men, maybe 20 strong, appearing from the tree line. They're not professional soldiers, just villagers and farmers with spears and agricultural tools, but they're angry and defending their homes. The Viking response is immediate and professional. Shield wall forms in seconds, a overlapping barrier of wood and iron with spears bristling forward. You're pulled into position, your shield locked with your neighbor's, suddenly part of a defensive formation that's been practiced and perfected over generations. The scared, exhausted sailor is gone. In his place is a cog in a well-oiled military machine. The local defenders charge, brave but untrained, emotional but uncoordinated. They crash into the shield wall and break against it like waves on rock. The Vikings don't even need to counterattack aggressively. They simply hold position, using spears to keep attackers at distance, using shields to deflect clumsy strikes, waiting for the amateur warriors to exhaust themselves. It's over in minutes. The defenders realize they're outmatched and retreat, carrying their wounded, leaving a few bodies behind. The Vikings don't pursue. They've got what they came for, and getting into a prolonged conflict with an increasingly alert countryside is exactly what successful raiding avoids. The Jarl gives the order to withdraw, and the entire force retreats toward the beach with practiced efficiency, loaded with plunder and supplies. The march back to the ships is tense. You're carrying loot now, which makes you a target. Every shadow could hide revenge-seeking locals. Every sound might be approaching cavalry. But the Vikings are professionals at this too, maintaining scouts, watching their backs, moving quickly but not panicking. The beach is a welcome sight, the ships even more so. Loot is loaded quickly, organization maintained even in the rush to get everything aboard and get away before serious resistance materializes. The longship is pushed back into the water. Much easier now that you're going downhill and everyone is motivated by the possibility of angry locals arriving. Oars out, everyone rowing with urgent energy, and the ship cuts back through the harbor toward open ocean. Behind you, smoke rises from the village. The monastery bells are ringing in alarm now, summoning help that will arrive too late. You're escaping cleanly, successfully, laden with treasure and supplies. Historians still argue whether Viking raids were primarily economic ventures or cultural expressions of warrior society. From your current position, exhausted, terrified, carrying stolen silver, rowing away from people whose lives you've just disrupted, it feels like both. The wealth is real and valuable. The experience of raiding successfully adds to the crew's reputation and your own status. But it's also horrifying, morally complicated, and not nearly as glorious as the sagas make it sound. The open ocean ahead is still cold, still dangerous, still ready to kill you with weather or waves or simple mistakes. But you're heading home now, or at least heading away from this coast, toward familiar territories. The return journey will be just as difficult as the outward voyage. Same terrible food, same lack of hygiene, same bathroom horrors, same navigation uncertainty, same sleeping on rocks. But now you're a raider. You've survived a Viking voyage, endured conditions that would hospitalize modern people, and participated in an actual raid. The treasure in your pack proves it. The scars on your hands prove it. The profound exhaustion in every cell of your body proves it. The wind picks up, and someone calls for the sail to be raised. The familiar routine unfolds: ropes, yard, massive wool sail catching wind. The ship surges forward, and you slump on your sea chest, too tired even to feel relief. One of the veterans catches your eye and nods with something like respect. "You made it," he says simply. "Most don't first time. The ocean, the storms, the fighting, you survived. You're a real crew member now." You're not sure if that's a compliment or just an observation. You're not sure you wanted to be a real crew member if it meant experiencing everything you've been through. But you nod back because what else is there to do? The voyage home stretches ahead. Weeks more of rowing, dried fish, sleeping on rocks, hanging over the ocean for bathroom breaks, and praying you don't hit another storm. The adventure, if you can call it that, continues. But now the rhythm of soft, endless rowing begins to blur into a meditative state. The ship rocks gently, cutting through waves toward home, toward warm beds, fresh food, baths, and all the comforts of civilization that you once took completely for granted. Your breathing slows. The oar dips and pulls, almost automatic now. The sun is setting again, painting the sky in those same orange and purple hues you've seen a dozen times this voyage. The crew is singing softly, a rowing song or maybe a prayer or maybe just sounds to fill the silence. You think about warm hearths and dry clothes, about beds that don't move, about food that doesn't taste like salt and regret, about never, ever volunteering for a Viking voyage again because once is enough, more than enough to last several lifetimes. The stars are emerging overhead, those same stars the steersman uses for navigation, those ancient guides that have watched countless ships cross these waters. Some made it home, some didn't. You're going to be one who makes it home, you tell yourself. You survived this long. You can survive the journey back. The wind carries the ship forward through darkening waters. The rhythm continues, eternal and unchanging. Wave, wind, wood, and the whisper of the ocean that never truly sleeps. Just like you're finding it harder and harder to fight the heaviness in your eyelids. The gentle pull of exhaustion after weeks of impossible demands on your body. Your grip on the oar loosens slightly. The rowing master doesn't shout. Maybe he understands, maybe everyone's too tired to care about perfect form anymore. The ship will carry you home. The crew will maintain the course. The stars will guide you through the darkness. And somewhere in the gentle rocking, the rhythmic splash of oars, the soft singing of exhausted warriors heading home with their plunder, you finally find something almost like peace. The voyage taught you something profound. Comfort is a luxury built on thousands of small conveniences you never noticed until they were gone. Every modern amenity, running water, stable ground, temperature control, privacy, hygiene, safety, is a miracle that countless generations lived and died without experiencing. You close your eyes, just for a moment, just to rest them against the salt spray and fading light. The ship rocks like a cradle, imperfect and uncomfortable, but persistent in its motion. The ocean whispers promises and threats in equal measure, carrying you forward through the dark water toward distant shores. The last thing you remember thinking is that you finally understand why Viking sagas focus on battles and glory rather than the journey itself. The journey, the real, physical, brutal journey, isn't something you celebrate. It's something you survive, something you endure, something you're grateful to complete. Your breathing deepens, matching the rhythm of the waves. The Viking Longship sails on through the night, carrying its crew of raiders and dreamers, survivors and storytellers, home through the darkness toward whatever tomorrow brings. Rest now, weary traveler. The ocean will carry you. The stars will guide you. And maybe, just maybe, when you wake, there will be land on the horizon. Sweet dreams.